Imagine you are driving home late in the evening with friends or family after a long day. The road is calm, the conversation in the car is relaxed, and everything feels completely normal. Then suddenly you notice flashing red and blue lights appear in your rearview mirror. In a moment, you realize a police officer is signaling for you to pull over. At first, you may not be worried at all. After all, you know you have not done anything wrong. Maybe you assume it is just a routine stop or a simple misunderstanding. But what many drivers do not realize is that a traffic stop can quickly turn into something much more serious if you are not careful about what you say or do. In fact, there are certain tactics that law enforcement officers commonly use during roadside stops, and if you are not aware of them, you could accidentally create problems for yourself even when you started the situation completely innocent. Understanding these tactics can make a huge difference in protecting yourself and staying calm during a stressful encounter. Traffic stops happen every day across the country. Most of them are routine and end without any major issues. However, the reality is that a simple conversation with an officer can sometimes lead to unintended consequences. Many drivers believe that if they are friendly and cooperative, everything will go smoothly. While remaining polite is always important, it is equally important to understand how certain questions or situations during a stop can be used to gather information that may later be used against you. When people are nervous, they tend to talk more than they should. They answer questions they are not required to answer, volunteer unnecessary details, or react emotionally to the tone of the officer. Those small moments can sometimes change the entire direction of the interaction. One of the most common tactics during a traffic stop involves simple conversation. When an officer approaches your vehicle, the first thing they often do is start casual small talk. They may ask where you are coming from, where you are headed, or how your night has been. These questions may seem harmless and even friendly, but their purpose is not always what it appears to be. Officers are trained to observe how you respond. They listen carefully to your answers and look for inconsistencies or statements that might suggest wrongdoing. If someone says they are coming from a restaurant but later mentions meeting friends at a bar, that contradiction might raise suspicion even if nothing illegal happened. Drivers often assume that answering these questions is part of the process, but in reality, the officer is trying to gather information. The goal may be to encourage you to reveal something that could justify further questioning or investigation. It is not unusual for a simple answer to open the door to additional questions that gradually become more serious. The conversation may begin casually, but it can quickly shift toward topics that place the driver in a difficult position. That is why it is important to remain calm and understand that not every question requires a detailed explanation. Another version of this tactic involves the opposite approach. Instead of friendly conversation, some officers may adopt an aggressive or confrontational tone from the very beginning. They may appear irritated, impatient, or even disrespectful. This behavior can be surprising, especially if you know you have done nothing wrong. The reason behind this approach is often psychological. By creating tension, the officer hopes the driver will react emotionally. When people feel attacked or disrespected, they are more likely to raise their voice, argue, or say something they later regret. That emotional reaction can then be used as justification to escalate the situation. Remaining calm during such an encounter can be difficult, but it is one of the most important things you can do. The officer may attempt to provoke a response, but reacting angrily rarely helps your situation. Staying composed keeps the focus on the officer's behavior rather than your own. When someone remains polite and controlled, it becomes much harder for the interaction to be interpreted as aggressive or threatening. Another critical point many people misunderstand involves the right to remain silent. Most people have heard this phrase countless times in movies or television shows. They assume that simply saying nothing is enough to protect them. In reality, exercising this right often requires clearly stating that you are choosing not to answer questions. Courts have repeatedly ruled that silence alone is not always enough to invoke that protection. If you wish to rely on your right to remain silent, you generally need to say it directly. This creates a situation that many drivers find confusing. They believe they can simply refuse to talk, but the law often requires a clear statement such as expressing that you are invoking your right to remain silent. Once that statement is made, you can then decline to answer additional questions beyond what the law requires. However, it is important to remember that certain basic information may still need to be provided during a traffic stop. In many states, drivers must present a valid driver's license and may be required to provide identifying information such as their name, address, and date of birth. Refusing to provide that information can sometimes lead to additional charges related to failure to identify. Understanding the difference between required identification and voluntary conversation is essential. Providing the information legally required of you does not mean you must engage in a lengthy discussion about your evening or your plans. Many people accidentally create legal problems simply because they continue talking when they do not have to. Another important factor during a traffic stop involves physical movement inside the vehicle. Officers are trained to pay close attention to what drivers and passengers are doing with their hands. Sudden movements, reaching toward the glove compartment or leaning toward the floor can quickly raise concerns about safety. Even completely harmless actions can be misinterpreted in a tense situation. For this reason, it is generally best to keep your hands visible, ideally resting on the steering wheel if you are the driver. Passengers should also keep their hands visible. If the officer asks you to retrieve something such as your license or registration, it can be helpful to explain what you are about to do before reaching for it. Simply stating that you are reaching into the glove compartment for your documents allows the officer to anticipate the movement instead of being surprised by it. Many drivers also choose to record traffic stops for their own protection. Recording can provide an objective record of what occurred if questions arise later. However, the driver must still prioritize safe and visible hand placement. If recording is done by a passenger, it may be easier because the passenger can hold a phone while the driver keeps both hands visible. Even when recording, maintaining calm behavior and avoiding sudden movements remains extremely important. Another moment that often occurs during a traffic stop involves the officer asking the driver to step out of the vehicle. Some people believe they can refuse such a request, but in many circumstances, officers do have the authority to require drivers to exit the vehicle during a stop. This authority has been supported by court decisions that emphasize officer safety during roadside encounters. Refusing a lawful order to step out of the vehicle can escalate the situation unnecessarily. When asked to exit the vehicle, the safest response is usually to comply calmly while continuing to behave respectfully. Slow and deliberate movements reduce the chance that your actions will be misinterpreted. Even if the request feels unnecessary, complying politely can prevent a routine stop from turning into a more serious confrontation. Another tactic that frequently occurs during traffic stops involves requests to search the vehicle. Officers often attempt to obtain consent from the driver to conduct a search. The conversation may begin with a question about whether there is anything illegal in the car. After the driver denies having anything illegal, the officer may follow up by asking if the driver would mind if the vehicle were searched. This question can be confusing because of how it is phrased. Many people respond quickly without fully thinking about the implications. Some drivers say yes simply because they feel pressured or believe they have nothing to hide. Others respond in ways that are unclear or ambiguous. The key point to understand is that if you give consent for a search, the officer is generally allowed to proceed without a warrant. Consent can remove many legal protections that might otherwise apply. When someone chooses not to allow a search, it is important to communicate that decision clearly and respectfully. Ambiguous answers can lead to misunderstandings about whether permission was granted. A clear statement that you do not consent to a search leaves little room for confusion. Even if the officer becomes frustrated or continues asking questions, maintaining that position calmly can protect your legal rights. Sometimes, officers may respond by saying they will obtain a warrant or call for additional assistance. This can feel intimidating, but it does not necessarily mean a search will happen. If an officer believes there is probable cause, they may pursue other legal methods to search the vehicle. However, the driver's refusal to consent simply means the officer must rely on those legal standards rather than voluntary permission. Another situation that can arise during traffic stops involves drug detection dogs. Officers may suggest they will call a canine unit to inspect the vehicle. This can be stressful for drivers because it often implies suspicion of illegal substances. However, the law generally limits how long a traffic stop can be extended for the purpose of waiting for a drug dog. Officers cannot normally prolong a routine stop indefinitely without a valid reason related to the original purpose of the stop. If the situation begins to feel unnecessarily prolonged, some drivers choose to politely ask whether they are free to leave. This question signals that the driver understands the stop should not continue longer than necessary. Remaining calm while asking this question helps maintain a respectful tone while clarifying the status of the encounter. If a drug dog does arrive, continuing to record the interaction can be helpful. Staying calm and avoiding confrontation remains critical. Even when a driver believes the stop is unfair, reacting emotionally rarely improves the outcome. The focus should remain on documenting the interaction and maintaining respectful communication. Despite taking every precaution, there are situations where an arrest may still occur. Being arrested is a frightening and frustrating experience, especially if you believe the situation is unjustified. In those moments, the most important thing to remember is not to resist or attempt to flee. Actions taken during the arrest can significantly impact how the situation is viewed later. Remaining calm and cooperative during an arrest does not mean admitting guilt. It simply means avoiding additional charges such as resisting or obstructing an officer. Once the situation moves into the legal system, having behaved respectfully during the encounter can make a difference in how the case is perceived. Video footage from body cameras or recordings often becomes part of the evidence, and calm behavior can strengthen your credibility. After an arrest, contacting a qualified attorney is essential. Legal professionals understand how to evaluate the circumstances of the stop and determine whether proper procedures were followed. They can examine evidence, review recordings, and identify potential issues with how the stop or arrest was conducted. Having experienced legal representation ensures that your rights are properly defended as the case moves forward. Traffic stops can be stressful, confusing, and sometimes intimidating, especially when they involve complex legal questions. The key to navigating these situations successfully is preparation and awareness. Knowing how officers may approach certain situations allows drivers to remain calm and make informed decisions instead of reacting impulsively. Staying polite, avoiding unnecessary conversation, keeping movements slow and visible, understanding your right to remain silent, and carefully responding to search requests are all steps that can help protect you during a roadside encounter. None of these actions are about being disrespectful or confrontational. Instead, they are about understanding how to interact with law enforcement in a way that protects your legal rights while maintaining a calm and respectful attitude. Ultimately, the goal during any traffic stop should be to keep the situation simple and controlled. Emotions, arguments, and unnecessary explanations can complicate things quickly. Remaining calm, respectful, and aware of your rights helps ensure that a routine stop remains exactly that, a routine stop. If you found this information helpful and want to continue learning more about your legal rights and how to handle real-life situations like this, consider staying connected for more educational content. Videos like this aim to break down complicated legal topics into practical advice that everyday people can understand and use. Your awareness and knowledge can make all the difference in protecting yourself and your loved ones on the road. If you have questions, experiences, or thoughts about this topic, sharing them can also help others learn and stay informed.